quick sort of breakdown of what we're going to go over today. We're going to do some stuff from Logic. We're going to cover some basic techniques, how to use Serum, some mix down techniques, and some mastering techniques. We don't have a massive amount of time, so we're going to kind of cram it in. So if you're new to production, that's fine. Or if you've been producing a long time, that's fine as well. I'm going to go over how I would start the basics of a track. So there's two ways of doing it. Really, you could start with samples, other people's samples, other people's presets, or you can make your own. So there's advantages to both, which I'll go over in a minute. So a little bit of background information on myself. I've been a drum and bass producer for, say, 15 years. I went to university, studied music technology. When I finished there, I started a band. I'm actually a drummer. We had some success with that. Harry Schotter was actually in the band as well. We went to school together, so we've been friends a long time. And I started producing after the band finished and started making drum and bass. Got one of my first overseas bookings, or my first overseas booking, which was in 2007, which was in Canada. And then from there, I've pretty much done the whole of Europe a stupid amount of times, America, Canada, and places, places like that really. But I've played all around Europe many, many times. I'm a much bigger DJ or producer in Europe than I am in the UK. Recently, past couple of years, I've been focusing on my live project, Kilohertz. I'll show you a bit of it. So we've got a full live band. We've remixed Fatboy Slim, Example, Friction, and we play some pretty big shows, and it's like mainly dance floor drum and bass. And we've been sort of working on a live show, played Beats for Love Festival in the Czech Republic, Mainframe, and we were, up until the pandemic, booked for a lot of live things, Creamfields and Ibiza Rocks and stuff like that. But as the pandemic's come in, we've just been focused on writing an album, but I'll give you a quick example of what the live show looks like. And then I'll talk a bit more about how we make these tunes as well. So in that, I'm playing the drums, producing the music with the other two guys, Phil and Mo, and then our frontman Multiplex, and then we've got two visual guys as well. That's Kilohertz, but let's get down to some production. And let me open up Logic, wherever it's gone. And I'm going to start real basic. I'm going to just have a quick look at what we've got here. We've got Serum. Lots of versions of Serum. If you haven't used Serum before, it's a synth. And this is it here, and this is one of the patches. Let's open this one up, have a look at this. This is a kick patch when it opens. And I'm going to go through, talk to you about how I make my drums in Serum, and there's even percussion and some basses and stuff like that. So going back to what I was saying earlier, there's two ways of producing. You can just use presets or samples from sample packs, or you can create your own sounds. I do both. I sometimes grab drums and vocal shots or whatever, wherever they're from sample packs or from Splice, and just use them to start a tune, or some old breaks, drum breaks and stuff like that. Or if you create your own sounds, it's you can tailor sounds for each track. So for instance, if you need a snare drum, you don't have to go through hundreds of different snare drums. You can sit and make a snare drum that fits the record. Same with a bass sound. So the more you do that, the better you get at sound design. And I prefer that these days, purely because, say, if I need a lead sound or I need some pads, I can just make them and tailor them to the track. So first of all, let's look at Logic. So if you've not seen Logic before, it looks pretty much like this. You got your mixer window down here, and I've set up like a template. So before actually I get into the sound design, let's talk about templates. So imagine if you start a record, and every time you start a record, you've got to set up your mixer, set up the plugins you like. It's very time consuming. So one great bit of advice is to build a template. So then when you just open up Logic, Ableton, Cubase, Fruity Loops, whatever. You have all your favorite plugins there, have all your settings, and you don't have to worry about setting it all up. It saves a massive amount of time. I do a lot of vocal work, I do a lot of ghostwriting for people, I do a lot of writing of music that people are not unaware of. And if I'm working in the studio with different people, I don't want to be sitting there trying to create a template while they're there. I've got many different templates for different things. So for this session, I created a template, and what I've done is I've set up, here's my serums here, you can see them all in green. Then I've set up buses, which in other DAWs are called groups, where you can bus stuff to them. So I say if I've got kick drums, I can send them to all one fader, or snare drums, but lots of different snares and so on. And then I've set up a couple of effects as well. Let me see if I can move this out of the way. Right. And then I'll set up some effects and stuff like that. And then I've got my master bus here with various plugins on it. So as I say, we're mainly using Serum, so we can just look at sound design, creating sounds from scratch. And then I've got my buses set up here with different effects on it for different reasons, which I'm going to go through as well. So first of all, let's go back and look at Serum. Open up this kick. This is a kick I've made, not particularly for this session, but I've got lots of presets that I've made myself, and this is a nice kick. And so Serum, it's made up of two oscillators, two main oscillators, and you've got this sub oscillator, so that's your third, but these are your wavetable oscillators, and then you've got this noise generator here. So you could say it's got 4 oscillators, but it hasn't really. So let's start with the sub. So you've got sub oscillator, oscillator A, oscillator B, then noise. So it's a better way of looking at it. And what I've done is I've chosen the simple wavetables and created a kick drum, and I'll explain a bit more about that right now. So oscillator A, I've used this wavetable analog BD sine, and that's sort of like the main essence of this drum, this kick drum. Oscillator B, I found this one, digital, so it's anti-staticus, I don't even know what that says, and that I've used for FM. Let me just double check. Yeah, it has used a bit of FM, so we talk about that afterwards. I've used some white noise here. Turn it off. It hasn't got that sort of like fuzzy sound to it. I'm not too sure what the sub's doing actually. Oh, it's only some bottom end. So let's look at these LFOs, and this is where I've shaped the sounds. Okay, so let's focus on LFO2. So what I've done is I've assigned this to level, drawn this shape on, and put it on an envelope mode and a rate of 0.5 BPM synced. So this is controlling the shape of the kick drum. So I'm going to get my keyboard, so I'll just play it like this. So if I change the rate of this, it doesn't have a massive effect because of the envelope. Let me try like this. Yeah, so now it's going to get longer. So essentially I've used the LFO and the envelope to shape the length of the kick. Let me turn this noise up, it's annoying me. Let me turn this off as well. And the sub. Alright, so that's almost the transient of the kick drum. Sort of clicky sound of it. Yeah, it has a bit of a tail on it. But that's sort of the starting point of it. Turn this off as well. So add the sub in, and I'm using the sub for a bit more body, and I've assigned LFO1 to the level. And then LFO3 is this here. And what I'm using this for is a bit more of a transient. I'm FMing it, which is frequency modulating from A. And I've drawn this tiny little shape on it with LFO1 to give it a transient. I'm not going to go too in depth with this because we want to move on to other things. The time's limited. It has a bit of filtering on it, and we have some effects in the effects section of Serum. So a bit of distortion, which seems to be assigned to one of these. Yeah, again to LFO1, and a bit of multi-band compression. and I've used a bit of EQ to tame the tops. So that's the kick drum, quite basic. Let's look at a snare drum. Similar in sort of design. Let's take a look at this patch. We're just using one oscillator here, oscillator A, using basic shapes, which is from here. And we're using this shape here. Let's look at the LFO. So the envelopes, we're not using the envelope for any shaping. We've got the noise on, so let's turn that off. Excellent. So LFO 1 is assigned to the level. So that's like your initial hit of the snare, and then it tails off. Let's put the noise on. Find which shape to it. Yeah, so LFO 3 is assigned to the level of the noise. I've pitched it up, and I've allowed this space here to let the initial transient of this drum through, and then slope down. So it's kind of like, you know, no volume here, and then it slopes down, so you get the tail of the snare drum. And there's maybe some pitching somewhere. Let's have a look. That might be assigned in the matrix. Starting to look confusing now. So the master tune, yeah, it is. So what I've done is I've taken this and used it to sort of have the snare pitch down. So if I exaggerate it, kind of like starts off higher. Yeah, it's a way of tuning the snare drum. Won't worry about it too much. As I say, I just have to keep mishing him through because we've run out of time otherwise. So yeah, we've got some tube distortion on it with probably some more, yeah, the same LFO 1 on the drive, and then a bit of multiband as well. So it's a real basic snare. And then I've made some hi-hats. Have a quick look at them. This would just be done with white noise normally. Yeah, so I've put some white noise in here and drawn a LFO shape on it, which I've assigned to the level of the oscillator A, and the level of the white noise. And I've used a small amount of FM synthesis, which is hardly audible. If you don't know what FM synthesis is, I won't go into it too much, but it's frequency modulation. If you Google it after this, you can use it for creating sounds. And then a bit of filtering. Everything's run through the filter with a bit of movement, cutting off the bottom end. And then the same on this, actually. So you've got a hyper, which is like a stereo effect. A bit of EQ, cutting out the bottom of the hats, you don't actually need. Once again, it's assigned to LFO 7. So you've got some movement. You've got your reverb, which is probably assigned to a macro, yeah. So you can add some reverb and a bit of chorus. Chorus adds some sort of stereo effect. So it's a bit rushed, I know, but there's some basic sort of techniques of making drums. You know, if we had more time, I could go really in depth and make it from scratch, but we don't have too much time. So, but onto a sub. So sub bass is really important. It's especially in drum and bass. You know, you need it to fill the frequencies. You need the bottom end, and if you get it right, it can be heard on small speakers and large speakers as well. So let's look at sub. Sub would be pretty straightforward to make. It's just made with a sine wave. You know, this particular one. You could choose that one. It's analog BD sine. Or saw rounded to square. The reason I use saw rounded to square is I can move through the wavetable position and change how the sub sounds. So you can hear that on smaller speakers, and obviously it appears a lot louder. It adds more harmonics. I can show you that in a frequency analyzer, actually. So you can see there, you know, mainly down here, this is your low frequencies down here. You have just, you know, a small amount of harmonics. These bumps here, these are harmonics. If you turn it more towards a square, you have a lot more harmonics. Harmonics are your friends. This is what allows you to get sort of fatter mix downs and fuller records. Like that is the key to making things sound fat. You can get harmonics added through adding distortion, because if you distort a sine, it turns it into a square in the end anyway. It can do anyway. You know, there's plenty of different types of distortion. I'll give you an example. If I put a real basic distortion on the sub, let me just find the bus with the sub on it. Say Camel Crusher, which is a free plugin, and add a bit of distortion to this sub. Watch what happens. Let me solo it quickly. Bring the analyzer back. So it's really good actually, because what you can see there is just that bit of distortion. It's making it sound a bit more like a square wave. And if you imagine like smaller speakers like laptops or iPhones or whatever, they can't really produce the sort of super lows because the speakers in them aren't big enough. So when you add the extra harmonics with distortion, you get this increase in harmonics here, and this is what will be coming out of smaller speakers. You know, it can't produce the super lows, but it can produce all this. So therefore, if you have a bit of harmonic content with the sine, with your sub bass, it can also be heard on smaller speakers, and it can cut through even in the club as well. So harmonics are really important. I won't go into it in any more detail right now, but let's look at making some patches, some bass patches. So something really basic like this, or something that sounds more complicated, but it's probably just as easy to make like this. Let's have a quick look at this one. So it's kind of a jump up patch. Call it. You could use it in rollers. And really, what I did was I imported my wavetables into Serum, which we won't go into too much detail. And I just used some FM from this oscillator, F frequency modulated this oscillator. Sounds very complicated. I'm probably going to confuse myself. But if you've been making tunes for a while, it's not complicated. Or if you want to learn how it actually works, you can do Google it. There's plenty of videos out there and stuff. So yeah, you can frequency modulate this oscillator. Bass patch, hold on. This one. So let me turn this off. And let me look at what the parameters are. So I turn off the noise. Let me just work on this oscillator here. Make sure it's just that one playing, yeah. So I've pitched it up one octave, and I've done the semitones +7, so it's a 7th. Quite interesting because there's still some sub bass playing, and I would have thought it would be coming from this sub, but obviously not. So check. I think it's just repeating. Sorry. So I have assigned this LFO shape to the noise. I turn it on, which you can hardly hear. Just send some fuzz, and this to this LFO. So this is a low pass filter from here, and that's what's creating the shape, the sort of movement. Yeah, so I've drawn on this shape here on LFO2, assign it to the cutoff, and that's what gives it the movement. Just looking at the effects section, I've added some distortion, and the mix is on 50%. Bit of flanger, a bit of chorus, a little bit of delay. A lot of these might be assigned to macros as well, so you can control them down here. Then you've got a bit of EQ, a bit of verb. So yeah, the macro at the moment controls this verb, but when it's down, There is no verb. When I turn it up, you get the verb. So that's a real basic patch. And if we look at this roller bass patch, it looks a bit more complicated. I've used more detailed wavetables that come with Serum. So Reese Mesh 3, and I've used this saw rounded to square. I do like this wavetable type. And this is using a bit more of FM synthesis. So let's mute a few things and just go to one of the oscillators. And turn all the effects off. Otherwise, we're going to hear it in its basic state. So it's a sine wave, pretty much. Kind of a noisy sine wave. I suppose the next step would be turn this oscillator on. And I'm sending this oscillator, it's turned all the way down, so this is not coming out of the speakers. It's just routing through into this, so it activates the FM. So if I move this a little bit, it'll change the sound. And what I've done here is I've taken the sub and routed that through oscillator B beforehand. Kind of gives it that shape. So there's nothing too much going on, no unison, no spreading, you know. A bit of filtering, the drive up, so it gives it a bit more volume. The filter is assigned to an envelope. You get this movement. And then really the effect sections where you kind of give it some more distortion, give it some fatness. Bit of EQ, bit of stereo, and some more filtering. So if you've not produced before, it probably looks very confusing. But that's just a real basic sort of how I would make sounds. Again, like we haven't got too much time, so I can't go into too much detail, but it kind of gives you an understanding of like what you could do just with one synth. You know, you can make the drums from scratch, kick drum. Snare, hi-hats, at the sub. Sounds crazy, but jump up drum and bass these days is pretty straightforward. So it's a mess at the moment. So what we need to do is think about mix downs. So to make this sort of playable, and sound good on the ears, really, is you've now got to get into the mixing stage. So the kick drum, snare drum, the hi-hats, they're good enough to use. They really are. They just need some processing. And the mixing side of things, you just need to clean some stuff up. So I was thinking about this morning, how best to explain mix downs. And the way I've gone these days is just try and leave everything, the faders alone. I just try and balance everything up. So say if I was making this patch, I would look at the output of Serum and try and get it as close to zero as possible. Without all the sounds playing. Let me mute that. That. Just keep the sub in and the drums. So I can see on Logic here that I'm like 2 dBs over zero. I'm going to leave it like that. That's fine. Like your DAW, no matter what DAW you're using, doesn't internally clip. It's only your master bus that can clip. What I mean by clipping is give you problems, give you distortion that you don't want. Unless you're putting plugins that are modeled on analog gear, you know, you can have some clipping issues, but don't worry about that. That's just sort of too far into the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to check the snare drum, see where that's hitting. Yeah, it's okay. It's like 2 dBs into the red. So just give me a little warning light. Nothing on that. Let's see what the sub's doing. The sub's hitting 0. So what I've done now, I've bust these already, I believe. So my kick's gone to a bus, my snare's gone to a bus, percussion, and then what I do is I send all of these buses, what I mean by buses are, sorry, is send it all to one fader. So say if I had 3 or 4 kicks, it'd all go to one fader. I can turn them all up and down as one. Same with the snare. Same with the percussion. And then what I do is I take these buses and then bus them again to one master bus, which is for my drums. So let me send the percussion to it as well. So drums, bus drums. I'll send it from here. There we go. So I've got them all as one. And I've got my sub sent to a bus and synth bus and so on. It just means that, say if I've got lots of different synth sounds, they'll go to one fader and I've got control over them and I can EQ and compress as a whole, and you get more of a cohesive sound. And also, if you want to get tunes sort of balanced, it's a lot easier when you've just got some group faders rather than, say, when I'm making kilohertz records, like, you know, we end up with like 150, 200 channels. You know, if you're trying to mix all them channels independently, it gets really confusing. Yes, you do some EQing and stuff for each element, each channel, but really you want to focus on your buses and try and reduce what you're doing on individual channels and just get everything, so it's quite straightforward. So on the buses, on the drum bus, I've got, for instance, a limiter, and what I use that for is so I put a lid on things. So if I solo this, sound crazy at the moment, these drums, but the more you process them, the better they get. So I've got a limiter on it here, and what this is going to do is stop anything going over 0 now. Like I was saying, I wasn't really too fussed on the individual channels, but now when I'm getting everything on my buses, I want to put a lid on it, so when it hits the master fader, the master fader's not having to sort of control loads of sounds. They're already being controlled before they get there. Okay, it sounds a bit confusing maybe, but really you don't really want to put too much sort of pressure on your master output, because you're going to start going into the red, and then you do actually get the distortion and stuff that you don't want. So when you look at this here, this is a FabFilter limiter. All limiters sound different, like all EQs sound different, but they all do the same thing. I like this limiter because it's kind of set up in a way that I can use it more like a compressor, because it has the same settings that a compressor would have. So, for instance, if I'm driving this hard, I'd bring the input gain up. It's not going to let any of these drums go above 0, but it's going to squash them together harder and harder, and to your ears, you'll think it's getting louder. So it's starting to distort, but you see it sounds a lot louder, but it's not actually going any louder, it's just squashing it. So to kind of explain how a compressor or a limiter would work, you have your inputs. This is your volume gain, this is how much it's going to squash it. And then you have your main features are really, these are your sort of limiter types. So in this limiter, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of limiters. I like this modern sound here. So these are the attack and the release of the two main things of compression or limiting. So let me just go forward. A compressor is a softer version of a limiter. So, and compressors are normally used for shaping sounds, like almost like an envelope shaper. So you can control things, change the sort of dynamics of things, change the transients, change the shape of things. And all it is if you get a compressor and put it into some extreme ratio setting, you end up with a limiter, pretty much. Limiters were designed originally for radio to stop stuff going over 0. So if you imagine if you was driving along in your car and a song was played and someone turned the volume up by accident back in the old days in the studio and it was stupidly loud, it doesn't blow your car speakers or whatever. It had to have some sort of ceiling. So, you know, the average consumer or person listening to a radio or whatever didn't have any volume increase or volume ducts. Do you know what I mean? It just kept it at a consistent level. So that's what a limiter does. It kind of just puts a lid on things. So to shape a sound with a limiter, this is your output here. It says 0. It won't go above 0. So to shape stuff with a limiter or a compressor is your attack and release. So what the attack does is, if it's all the way to the left, it's like instant. It's not going to sort of let any of the sound through. It's just going to squash it straight away. So if you imagine like your voice, if I was like, as soon as I did the first part of that, it's going to compress really hard or limit really hard. So if I move it this way, it's going to let a little bit of it through, which is what we call the transient, like the initial part of the sound. So it's going to let some of the sound through. And then release is like how much it compresses it for, how long it compresses it. So if I move it to the right, it's going to be limiting for a long time, you know, pretty much the whole duration of the sound till the sound stops. Or if I bring it this way, it only limit for a small amount of time. So extreme settings would be like this. So this would mean it would let a lot of the sound through and hold it for a small, well, pretty much 0 time. However, if I brought it this way, it's going to let some of the sound through and limit it for a long time. So kind of confusing because, you know, if you think about what I said, nothing goes above 0. And wait, what do you mean letting the sound through? And, you know, it doesn't make much sense. It's all to do with perceived loudness. Like when we drove this and all of a sudden the drum sounded louder, it's sort of like fools your ears. So yes, it can't go above 0. And yes, it's not actually letting the sound through so it goes above 0. You know, it's actually just fooling your ears. So you end up sort of hearing the initial sound come through more. And, you know, this is how long it limits for. Kind of confusing, I know. But try to explain all of this stuff in an hour or so is it's kind of quite hard. You know, you could spend a good couple of hours explaining compressors and limiting and stuff like that. But it's just a broad sort of understanding. And there's plenty of stuff out there, plenty of great courses, plenty of stuff on the internet as well to learn, you know, what I'm showing you in detail. But let me go back to go forward. So the limiters are being used, forget the settings now, to put a lid on things. So my drums, as a group, my drum bus here is got a lid on it. It's not going to go above 0. When it hits the master bus hasn't got to deal with lots of like peaks, lots of quiet bits. You know, drum and bass, we don't need dynamics really. Maybe on the intro, if you're making sort of rollers, jump up drum and bass, dynamics are irrelevant. You just kind of got to squash the hell out of everything, make things sound flat and fat, and limiting is like a key part of this. So, and compression, but I mainly use limiting. As I say, this limiter here is set up in a way that it can be used as, you know, it's set up like a compressor would be. A lot of limiters don't have attack and release like this, but this one does. So that's why I use it. I wouldn't use it necessarily on vocals, but if I want to get basses to sound fat, I drive them into it, like move these knobs about until things sound good. And then there you go. Same with drums. What my go-to settings for drums would be more attack. So I let more of the transients through, the snappy parts of the drums, and less release. So it kind of fools your ears into thinking, okay, the drums are still snappy and they've got louder. Make sure we're on the right limiter. What we can do is also go back to go forward So we haven't done anything to the serum drums, we've just designed them. So they're being sent to that drum bus here. So I can hear the kick drum starting to distort. The more I limit it, the more it's kind of distorting. So what I would normally do now is work backwards. I would then go to the kick drum and maybe start with an EQ. So talking about EQing, let's look at this. So we'll get rid of that. This flat line here is your frequencies. So down the bottom you have your bass, you have your mid-range, higher mids, and higher frequencies. So learning EQing or how to EQ or how to hear when to EQ and stuff, it's not that hard. You just got to put in the work. So I would say, let me turn this off. Look at frequencies. So down here, you can see on this Fab Filter Pro Q3, it tells you your frequencies here. Or if you look in Logic, go to the drum and there we go. So the Logic EQ gives you the same sort of thing. So let's work with this. So I know from being a producer for a long time, kick drums don't really need too much information below, say, 40 hertz, 50 hertz. So I might roll that off. I know that some of the body of a kick drum is around 100 hertz. Some of the sort of, if you want a kick to poke out, you can sort of boost around 2K. And the tops above 10K and 20K are irrelevant. So I know that through experience. So how did I figure this out? Well, I've done it in many ways with working on music, using frequency analyzers, like I showed you earlier, so you can see where things are hitting frequency-wise, and understanding the sort of nature of sound. So let's go back to this. Look at this EQ. Actually, let me go back to the Logic one. I can do it now. So sub-bass frequencies, stuff that you feel in a nightclub or on a decent sound system, they kind of hit to around, what's this saying here? I'm going to put a point in here. Yeah, so this one here, around, I don't know, up to about 100 and, just say 100. So for 20 hertz, you can't really hear it. Not many speakers can produce it, not many clubs can produce it, but it's still there because you can kind of feel it. So say from about 30 hertz to about 100 hertz are your sub-bass frequencies, where you get your weight in your sub, your weight in your kick. Nothing really else. Yeah, your basses or whatever, but nothing really else ends up in that region. From 100 to 200 is quite important. 100 to 500 is where you start to get, what you'd hear at speakers, like when I did some distortion on that sine wave, or we moved the wavetable into a square, it started adding them harmonics. And this is the sort of region that human hearing is more, is better at hearing. Like down here, you feel it. Up here, you start to hear it more. So, you can have like the more body of your kick, the sort of main fundamental of your snares, the ones that sort of hit, your bass, your top layer basses. It's good to have frequency information here because it's kind of weighty because it's still down the lower frequency region, but it's weighty enough to cut through on iPhones and stuff like that. And obviously in clubs, laptop speakers, headphones. Up here is like from say 1 to 5K is a region that human hearing is really good at hearing. It's not a flat curve, our hearing. It doesn't just look like this. We're not very good at hearing the super lows. We're not very good at hearing the super highs, but we're really good at hearing from 1K to 5K. It's the sort of frequency range that smoke alarms are out, babies crying, your car alarms, stuff like that. So you can use this sort of frequency region to make things sort of jump out of the mix. As I say, our human hearing is not a flat line. It's kind of like, it's a bit odd. It's almost like a slope. When you look at tunes on an analyzer, they normally slope down, because we can hear this better than we can hear this. So we have to have a kind of unnatural sort of shape when we're mixing music, but it sounds good to us. It's not unnatural to our hearing, it's just you think, why does it look like that? Why is it sloping down? But it's just the way we hear. So yeah, so this region here, if you want something to poke out of a mix, like a vocal or whatever, it's really good to kind of focus on these areas, you know. And then your high end information above that, bring this back down, say from I don't know, 5 onwards, but you can hear up to 10k quite well. But after 10k, it's kind of like, you know, almost whispery, kind of like it's inaudible, you know. I can give you an example of that actually. Let's quickly grab a demo track, like let's take this track I'm working on at the moment. Just play, should work. Okay. So now I'm soloing the high frequencies. There we go, the super highs. Let's bring this down to about 13. It's not too bad, you can hear it, but when you check it in comparison to the mids, you know, that's more audible. That's more audible, and then you check the lower mids. So let's do it another way. Let's do it with an EQ. And then I can just demonstrate it a bit better. So let me just grab that filter, free EQ. I can demonstrate this a lot quicker and change the slope, so it's quite drastic. So let's say 10k. Let's listen to the high frequency information. Start bringing it down. You know, it's not the greatest sound, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is our hearing. If we start bringing this down with 1, we start to hear more and more. Okay, you can kind of hear the record now. Bring this down more. So you can hear, you know, it's quite audible. You can hear what's going on in the track. But if I sort of solo these frequencies here, where I was saying that we're good at hearing, and not the nicest frequencies, because it's kind of feels over exaggerated. Let me just skip the track quickly. Now, if you take this, put it down to the super lows, start opening it up. What I'm trying to demonstrate is, you know, if you spend a bit of time with EQ, sweeping stuff around, you know, that was a whole track, but even on individual instruments, you can start to hear stuff and you're like, okay, that needs, you know, without having to look at analyzers, without having to sweep about, after a while, you'll be like, oh, the 4K is a bit harsh. I need to, you know, remove that, or it hasn't got enough bottom end. I think, you know, 60 Hertz might help it. All right, I'm working on a vocal, it's not cutting through enough. I'm going to boost 4K, 2K. You know, it's just, the more you EQ, the more you can kind of hear stuff, make decisions. So that comes with practice, time. You know, you could do this with the Logic EQ. It doesn't really matter. So that's just sort of like a little brief thing on EQing. So if I wanted to go back to these drums, I know we've run out of time, and go to kick drum to try and clean up. Turn this off. Try and clean up the fact that the more I limit it, the more it's distorting. It's squashing it too much. I might be able to add a bit of EQ. Take out some of the lows. Right. kind of wouldn't do that. It's kind of killed off the super lows and the kick drum, but you can see what it's done. It's taken out some of the frequencies to allow room for it to be limited harder. It's like this, right? It's trying to figure this out. It's like a box, you know. If you imagine you're trying to mix a record and you've just got to fit it all into one box. If you fold things or make things nice and neat, then it's all going to fit into the box well. But if you kind of just go raggo and just, you know, don't give it any attention and just stuff everything in there, you're going to end up with lots of distortion and the box is going to be bulging out. So that's the only way I can kind of get my head around it. What we're trying to do is build boxes within boxes. So imagine this limiter, my drum bus is one box. We've got to pack everything into that box really nicely. And then say the synth bus, where we send, you know, if we get a bit further into a tune, we're sending loads of bass sounds to it, with the limiter on. We want to pack it into that box nicely. And so on. We end up with loads of nicely packed boxes, all squashed in, all really nice. And then they all go into one final box, which is your master bus, which has one more limiter on it. And that just, all the boxes go inside that, and you close the lid on top of it there. So it's all nice and neat. If you have no control over what you're doing, like I used to when I first started producing, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I'd have things in the red, things crazy, things going everywhere. I don't know, if someone said to me about boxes, I'd be like, shut up, you idiot, I'm making tunes. You know, I'm not interested in that, but I am interested in that now because obviously I want to release music that sounds great, sounds killer on the dance floor, sounds good on the radio. So yeah, it's a bit vague what I'm saying, but imagine if you're just trying to bus everything, all the drums go to one bus with a limiter on it, nice tidy little box, close the lid, amazing, synth bus, vocals, all go to a bus with a compressor or limiter on it, nice and neat. By the time it hits the master bus, it's not all over the place. There's not like a snare drum that's coming out 10 dB too loud, and so on and so on. So yeah, a bit of EQ on the kick. It's kind of fixed the distortion. I'm just using that as an example. So let's look at other ways of boosting things. So yes, you could look at this snare and be like, right, let's boost the fundamental at 200. Starting to sound like a bit wacky. So that's kind of cool. Let's boost the top end and it starts to sound a bit harsh. It's cool, but I'm thinking, right, I like what it's doing, but I don't really like the sound of what it's doing. So you could go back to the Serum where we made the snare and tweak that, see if you can improve it on that, or you could start processing it. A quick way is a real basic plugin. This is Camel Crusher. It's a real basic distortion. This is it here, 2 dials. This is a compressor and so on, but you only got to focus on this one here. You've got tube and mech, so it's 2 different styles of distortion. There's many different styles of distortion, but tube is really good based on old tube circuits or tube valve devices, not circuits, like valves. I don't know if you've ever seen a valve, it's like a glass thing in real life. So it has a certain sound to it. So what this can do is this will add harmonics, like when we was looking at the bass, the sub bass. So instead of just EQing what's there, it kind of adds to it. So let's listen to what it does to the snare. Kind of made it sound fatter. I don't know if we can see it on a frequency analyzer. Where did I put that? There we go. So hopefully, some of the harmonics will disappear now. Yeah, I can see. I know it's a bit hard to see when I've got the analyzer sort of half off the screen, but I can see some of these harmonics coming up. So it's not a boost; it's actually adding harmonics. Kind of, it's adding distortion, making things sound fatter. So quickly talk about distortion and saturation. So they're 2 different things, really. Where we're kind of using that as almost to saturate it, but I'm not going to go into that too much now because I'll run out of time. I must have said about 20 times in this video. Distortion saturation, let's treat them as one. They can imagine that box, everything's like crammed in there, like not crammed in there, everything's in a box, yeah, the drum bus nice and neatly. So imagine the snare drum is like a piece of foam, like it's in the box, like you know, being all foamy and nice and airy. So if we start to distort it, it makes it more denser, makes it become harder and harder and more brittle. Not brittle, more solid. So instead of it being foam in this box, which is the snare drum, you end up turning it into something harder, like wooden, and then if you keep driving it, it becomes more like concrete. So it's the same size in the box, it's just sounding bigger. It was just filling up, sort of becoming denser. Yeah, it's not changing in size. It's just becoming more dense, like a denser material, and that's what distortion and saturation can do. It can take a sound and it can make it just harder and fatter. That's why you add harmonics. Hope that makes sense. It's kind of something I've got to sort of figure out in my own head, this kind of box thing, but I believe it kind of makes sense. If you kind of get your head around what I'm saying, you know, learn from other courses, other online YouTube videos, there's a lot of stuff out there to sift through. So be aware, a lot of it out there is kind of can take you down a rabbit hole. But this kind of technique of what I'm explaining to you can get you to the end result very quickly. Like it's taken me, say, 10 years to learn how to mix down. But if I had more time, you could probably mix down at the end of a session well enough for it to play in a nightclub and it sound great next to other people's music and loud enough, and you don't have to worry that it's going to sound, you know, not sound right, and so on. So that was a bit of distortion on the snare. So let's look at taking, we've done our tune now, just so we've finished the record. I know it sounds terrible, but don't worry about that. It's just an example. And you think about mastering. So what is mastering? Mastering is just something that you can get a record and release it or play it in a club. So there's mastering engineers out there that you can pay, send you a pre-master to, and they do the job for you. This is all well and good if you're releasing commercial music, but if you're making drum and bass, it's quite difficult to get the mastering engineer to understand what you're trying to achieve or what loudness you want, and so on and so on. So I end up mastering my own music, and I find that most drum and bass producers master their own music as well. So this is something that people get twisted. They think, oh, mastering will make my record sound good. No, it won't. What mastering will do is, if your record sounds bad and you're asking it to be really loud, you know, so you can play it in a club, you know, at a decent drum and bass level, it's going to make things sound worse because your mix sounds wrong. So everything's done in the mix. So you've got to get your EQ in right, your sound design right, or the samples you use have got to be quite cool. You know, everything's got to be right in the mix before it gets anywhere near mastering. I master as I go. So I have a limiter on my master bus here. So as I was making a record, it's going to sound terrible, but let me take solo off. Put that sound on it. Just put that one on it. Not my greatest tune. But yeah, the limit here is going to catch anything going into the red, and, you know, clipping your master bus going above 0. And it's going to make things sound louder. The harder I drive it, the more distortion you get. But sometimes you can use that to your advantage. And you can put a bit of EQ on it to help that. Say if you're like, oh, okay, I like the loudness, but you know, oh, Logic better not crash. I like the loudness. There we go. But I'm like, oh, it's a bit too much. So there's a way around that. You can start sort of thinning things out a little bit to help the compressor or limiter, sorry, work. So maybe take a bit of the lows out, You know, I wouldn't normally have an EQ like this, but straight away to getting rid of some of the sub has stopped that kind of distorted sound. You might be like, oh, it's not bright enough, so I'm going to boost it here. Sounds a bit ropey. I don't know, maybe that sort of harsher frequencies might make it appear louder. Cleaned it up. It's basically removed some of the low information to allow the limiter to not work so hard. Okay, yes, it's not the greatest sounding tune. It sounds awful, to be honest. But let's play it next to, just in terms of loudness, let's play it next to this record. Yeah, it sounds terrible, but as it goes, you could just about get away with playing that in a nightclub, and it's, you know, you wouldn't clear the dance floor, and all we've done is create a kick, a snare, a sub bass, a percussion loop, and the top bass in Serum. That's all it is. We've limited or we've bust things, put limiters on them, and then limited the master bus. Did a little bit of EQ, a tiny bit of saturation. We didn't even write a tune, you know, it's just one note. You know, there's no musicality to this, there's nothing, but it's just an understanding of where you can get to in a short amount of time. Cut out any of the waffle that there is about making music, you know. Yes, you do have to understand certain elements, but it's not as hard as you think to get to the end result. Saying that, it's not the greatest tune, but if we make the snare drum sound good, and then, you know, we maybe put some distortion on the sub and fatten things up, change the bass sound a bit, use more than one note, you know, re-pitch the snare, you could do all sorts, you know, we could be like, oh, okay. Who knows? You could, yeah, you could literally do a lot more than there is here. That's a mess because this and the sub are playing at the same time. But yeah, back to what I was saying. It's just having the understanding of making music simply. You know, it's not that hard. If you don't want to make your own sounds, that's fine. There's plenty of sample packs out there, like I said earlier. It's loads. A lot of drum bass producers are making them now, mainly because of the pandemic. Like on my website, I've put a load, so you can get all the Serum patches and drums and stuff. Yeah, sample packs right in the middle. I know Spy's doing it, various other people. There's a load of free packs here. If you want stuff to get you going, you can grab them here. Or yeah, you can go on different websites, Splice, other drum and bass artists, grab your own samples, grab some samples, grab the presets, and then off you go, really. Then you could just drag and drop, you know, like for instance, I did grab some of my drums earlier, made loads of kicks, so I could just be like, oh, I like that one. You know, if I'm making a tune and make good sounds, I export them, and some of them ended up in packs. And then I could just drag them in, and then just move them about, program beats, You know, let's mute this one. Same with kicks, you know, or percussion loops. You don't have to. There you go. That's at 174, but you don't have to make everything yourself. Even though I did make all these myself. But yeah, that's just a basic way of doing things. Two ways of doing it. So let's just sum it up. So using sample packs, one way of doing it. Creating your own sounds, another way of doing it. As I say, I like creating my own sounds. You can make sounds tailored to the record. But then again, I do use sample packs as well. So we kind of looked at EQing real quickly, compression and limiting. You know, I kind of said they're the same thing. We didn't look at anything like reverb. We didn't look at send effects, which is stuff I put written down in front of me. We did look a bit, you know, how to create drums from scratch, a bit of synth design, a bit of FM synthesis. You know, there's a lot to cover in a small amount of time. But as I say, there's plenty of other ways of getting this information. The people I've teamed up with today, Community Music as well, they put this on for free. They do some fantastic courses. You should check them out. But yeah, I don't really want to go into too much more detail. Maybe we could actually just look at other people's music quickly, just so it gives you an understanding. I'm going to do that quickly. Just go through some tracks and talk about frequency analyzers to end it, because this might help as well. It kind of sums up what we just sort of went over. So let's take this Shy Effects and Breakage track, Michael Knight, and play it and open a frequency analyzer. Turn it down a different way so I can talk over it and have it playing in the background. Okay, cool. Right, so the name of the game here really is to get, you know, your sub sitting up really high, nice and fat, you know, kind of low mids information. Kind of left some of that because it's a bass heavy record. You can see like the kicks and snares sort of coming around here, and then you get percussion creating a lot of the interest. It's not a particularly like mega loud record, like where I mean mega loud, like as in like it sounds loud on your ears. It's just a nice sounding record, well mixed. So let's look at another track here. If we look at Pendulum, so that's the latest drum and bass record. This has got like some super lows. The more you look at records, the more you start to analyze them with frequency analyzers, the more you'll start to see the same sort of traits. And then you can think, all right, what's my music missing? You know, when you're checking your Masterclass or checking your bounce, what's going on here? Why doesn't my tune sound like that? Let's check this. This is like bass heavy as well, so you'll probably see a gap in the lower mids a bit. Well, that's the lower mids there, where he's brought this additional synth in. Yeah, there you go. Nice big gap here, so his kick pokes through, and that's his top end on his bass. What else have we got here? Track I made with North Bass. This is Dance Floor. So this would probably be quite full frequency wise. Yeah, so there's a lot of like super lows, highs, tops. You know, we didn't cover many things as well, which you've got to be aware of, like stereo, the fact that we mix in stereo, 2 speakers, 2 headphones, you know, mono information, stereo information, reverb effects. There's a lot of stuff to cover, and yeah, look out for it. I'm not going to say too much more. But frequency analyzing is really important. But your ears are the most important thing. The more you can train your ears, the better you will be as a producer. It's all well and good using tools like frequency analyzers, but if you can see what's wrong but don't know how to get there, or you can't hear how to get there, then it's a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to take some questions. Hopefully I can figure out how to do it. Don't know if it's going to be unmuted for me, so people can talk to me. Oh, here we go. There we go.
We've got a few questions that have come into the
into the chat.
If do people want to ask directly? I know Leo, you had a question about keyboards. It's cool. So I wanted to ask advice. Which MIDI keyboard would we recommend as a beginner? I know we've had some suggestions in the chat already, but yeah, any that you've kind of experienced that you would recommend?
To be honest, I'd use any. It's just I'm more interested in like if your computers can handle latency and stuff, so you don't get any problems when you press a MIDI note and it's out of time. But there's like from the top of the head, like Native Instruments do some good stuff. M-Audio, Akai. It's just whatever you fancy, really. Obviously, if you're on a budget, you've got to be careful and buy one that's not got loads of functions you don't need. It's, if you're a keys player, if you want to feel it's weighted, if you're a keyboard player, if it has some sort of decent action to it. But I would say pretty much they're all pretty decent these days. It's not like when I first started, it was limited. There's plenty of brands out there. I'm just going to quickly read some of these questions.
Cool.
MIDI keyboard, okay, yeah, Akai is good. How do you ensure the volume of final track radio ready for volume wise with a limiter on a master bus, what we kind of looked at the end? Any plans for extending paid masterclass? Possibly. Akai good. So you can master it in the same project if it's created. Yes, I do. Otherwise, if I need to change something, like if I'm like, oh, you know what, this tune would sound a lot better if I had a louder kick drum, I can just turn the kick drum up. If I bounced it to a WAV, it starts to become long. Do you know what I mean? So I normally master as I'm going, and I wouldn't necessarily have loads of plugins on the master bus. I'd just have a limiter. But towards the end, like in this project, if I had more time, I was going to show you. There's certain types of plugins that I already use on the master bus, like this Opal EQ by Acoustica. It's more of a mastering EQ, and the reason it looks old school is it has a sound to it. Like Studio Gear has harmonics in it. When I distorted the sub bass and stuff, added them harmonics. Old vintage gear adds harmonics as whilst you're EQing and stuff like that. That's why it makes things sound really nice. And this EQ is based on an old EQ by John Oram. It's called the High Def EQ. So yeah, without waffling on too much, I would add a bit of analog EQ. It's like Soothe too, which is a good plugin, which is like artificial intelligence plugin. So it kind of does some of the work for you, and it can soothe out or smooth out some of your top ends, so you don't have to figure it out yourself. Plugins are getting better, and so on. So I would basically be making a tune, running into a limiter, and when I'm happy with that, but I can't get any more out of the mix, I'd be like, right, what would happen if I added a bit of EQ on the master bus like this one, and boosted the tops just a little bit? It looks confusing when you haven't used a plugin or an EQ before, but maybe I need some more sub, or I don't need some sub, I'd take away, stuff like that. So yeah, I would make a tune running into a limiter, and at the end add some subtle things. With mastering, you don't do massive EQ boosts and stuff like that. Well, as the drum and bass sit in the same sort of frequency, how do you make sure you can hear both clearly? That's one thing I didn't talk about, but I had it set up, side chaining. So I would send my kick to these and snare to these side chains. So let me give you an example real quickly. If I solo these and the sub, hopefully, and got rid of that track that's playing. Yeah, what this is doing here, let me Let me get that mixer back actually. Turn that down. What it's doing is, right, it looks confusing if you don't know what sidechaining is, but what it's doing is acting like a volume. So every time the kick hits, it turns the sub down. You can see these lines? That's it, like literally grabbing the volume and turning it down on the sub. So the kick drum and the sub bass have super low frequencies in both of them. What you need to do is make room for each other. So because the kick's so quick and snappy, you won't really notice it, but every time the kick's hitting, it's actually ducking the volume of the sub out of the way. And it's basically attack and release again. That's saying happen instantly. And this is how long it lasts for. Same on the limiter, you know. So if I put this back up in volume, I can get the master bus. You can kind of hear the sub, if you've got good speakers, ducking out the way. For some reason, my headphones have gone really quiet, but I just have to deal with it. Won't turn up anymore my end. So yeah, sidechaining. You can look into that. There's plenty of better examples of how to do it online or on courses. Yeah, someone's written sidechaining. What's your tips and tricks to go to plugins to create effects? I use a lot of reverbs on sends. So I would say take one of these sounds, like this. And I believe, just send the sends here. I'll send it to a reverb send. So I've set up a reverb. So now it's adding this reverb here. You can find it. Sorry, my window's a bit full. Yeah. Now I've got this reverb on it and I could mess around with that. Or that's one way of doing things. So reverbs are really good. As I say, I haven't got too long, so I can't really go into mad detail with it. But reverbs are great on basses, especially if you're making rollers or jump up. Or you can use distortion on sends. So I don't put necessarily the distortion straight on the sub bass, for instance. But what I could do is create a send. Take that solo. Create a send again and add something like trash, which is by Isotope. And this is just a distortion unit, like that. And what I've done is sent just a sub bass to this a distortion unit. So I'm just distorting the sub. If we play them two together, hopefully, yeah, I've got this distortion on it, and I can adjust things, and you know. And if you want to make that kind of roller bass lines, you could make the sub move with an LFO or something. Or even just add another sine wave to it right there, detune them. Or add in, you know, you can start to get interesting effects where you get more movement and stuff like that. And I think I put an EQ on it, so you could even tweak the EQ. You know, and so on. So distortion is your friend. That's one way of creating some interesting effects. Reverbs and distortions. So so clear your top mixing down and balance each bus with each impression. Yes, I am. Basically, I'm making things as fat as they can be, running into a limiter. And when they start to distort, I could turn them down. But, you know, if I like the fatness of them, I'm like, right, how can I stop the limiter from distorting, maybe take away and so on. And I do that with the master bus as well. Like I've spent this week mixing down kilohertz tracks, and I've run them so hard that they're on the verge of distorting in a good way. And then I'm like, how can I get rid of that distortion? So I go back to the original elements, you know, and start re-EQing them and stuff and changing the sort of shape of the record. So therefore it keeps keeps the fatness and loudness that I like, but fixes any of the errors that are coming out of the speakers which I don't like. Any ideas for recording, processing, bass guitar, etc., drum and bass? Yeah. So if you've got a sound card, you plug your bass into it. There's plenty of like virtual instruments or virtual effects, like guitar rig and stuff like that, which you can use. If you want to record your own bass cabinet, there's plenty of YouTube videos on how to place the microphones. You need a certain type of mic. But yeah, I'd say guitar rig, and if you want to record your own cab, then Native Instruments guitar rig. If you want to record your own cab, Google, or watch some videos on it, where to place the microphone and what microphone to use, because different types of microphones essentially do different things or have better frequency responses. One of them might be better recording bass, one might be better recording vocals, and so on. So any tips for mixing and processing vocals? Yes, I do a lot of vocal work for a lot of artists. I've worked with Jurassic 5, an old hip hop crew, all of SAS, Evil B, Shotter, Storming, big him up, like Example, Foreign Beggars. I've done a lot of tracks with a lot of people, and I've recorded a lot of vocalists. So I know quite a bit about it. So the first thing you really need is a good microphone. If you haven't got a good microphone, you're going to have problems down the line. You need a good microphone and a good room to record the vocals in, because I don't know if you can hear this room. It's quite a big living room. If I recorded vocals in this room right now, you would pick up the sound of the room. That's not what you want. So you need a good vocal booth, good microphone. Then you need a preamp. So 9 times out of 10, if you want to do it properly, a preamp powers the microphone, and a preamp has a good sound to it. So it kind of like amplifies the mic and makes it sound nice, adds some more harmonic content and stuff like that. So a nice preamp is good. Focusrite are quite good preamps. Good starter mics, I would say. I don't know really. Sure. SMB or something. No, something like that. They're like radio mics. Or if you've got a bit more money, Neumann. I couldn't really. There's lots of mics out there that you could just Google. But yeah, processing vocals, right? So I would start with an EQ. Let's just quickly do it here on something. I'd start with an EQ. Say if this is your vocals here, I would add an EQ. I would cut out some of the super lows, kind of maybe give it a little boost of 10K. Be aware that this area here is going to get really harsh. So it depends on the mic, and I'd probably put a little bit more of a cut there to get rid of any boomiest. I can't even say it. I'll adjust the Q of this as well. Be aware of this frequency. If you want them cut through a bit more, if you don't, just keep it there. But that's kind of an EQ sort of start. Then I would compress after that. So if you was working in, I don't know where we're at, Logic, if I went to Dynamics, find a compressor, I would set it up to, there's your threshold. So you bring that down. So that's how much it compresses. I'd probably have a decent attack, a quicker release if I was working on, you got auto here, so maybe leave that on. That kind of look on this compressor, and I'd want to see some gain reduction when it's going in. Then I would probably use like a de-esser, and what a de-esser does, you can focus it in to just compress certain frequencies. So the S's and the T's, you can tell it to turn down them frequencies essentially. So you'd set that up, see that the frequencies there, like 7,000K, which is about where the S's are in my voice. Then I might compress it again. Let's go with that. Give it a bit more compression, because it's better if you have, rather than one compressor doing all the work, if you have like space it out. It's kind of important, the order of this as well, because if your compressor's compressing a vocal with loads of bass in it, which you don't want, the compressor's going to react, it's going to have to work harder for these low frequencies. So if you've got rid of the low frequencies, the compressor's not trying to compress them. So yeah, it compresses, which basically sort of flattens it out, de-esses it, get rid of any of the harshness, compress it again, and then maybe some saturation, maybe add some more harmonics and a tiny bit of room reverb, and you're kind of there. So it's you can do a whole session on vocals. There's an art to it. Processing vocal, thanks, Herbs. Can you tell us about saturation part? Do you usually use saturation? I'm not too sure what element you mean. Saturation part. Saturation, I would use it to pretty much everything. I use it to fatten up so much stuff. You know, whether it's vocals, small amounts on everything, because the more you use it, the more you get addicted to it. Let me see if I've got any type of saturators, like I was saying, like nothing really there that I want to pull up. Like I was saying, like vintage hardware, vintage mixing desks, they all add saturation. That's why, like, people like, I don't know if you've ever heard of famous mixing desks like SSLs or Neves. They're like, yeah, I want to mix on SSL. So SSL, just say it costs £250,000. The one that Dre and everyone used in to mix all the classic hip hop albums. Like, just putting your vocals or your tunes, your stems, your kicks, your snares into that mixing desk adds saturation, adds a little bit of distortion, and you think, right, do I really want that? But it's so minor and it sounds so nice. What it actually does is it makes your tune sound nice before you've even done anything. That's the key of saturation. So it's adding those little bits of harmonics that makes things sound better. So you can do that with inside the box. So you end up sort of adding little bits of saturation on everything from different plugins. So it's on the keyboard. So yeah, it's look into saturation. There's plenty of like modeling of vintage analog stuff out there, plugins. There's stuff inside this. Like when I was looking at that compressor, wherever it is, just on the vocals, it's got distortion. So probably soft is going to add saturation to the vocals. You know, there's plenty of things out there. Like EQing, I use it for more cutting and fixing problem areas, like I did earlier with, say, that kick drum and the group channel, sorry, the bus channel on the drums. I use EQ for more cutting, like, you know, transparent EQs like these. They don't have any saturation in them. And I use things like, you know, saturation to boost things because it adds more harmonics. Okay, this EQ, it's an EQ, looks very confusing. But because it's based on a bit of vintage gear, when you're boosting as well, it's adding harmonics as well as frequencies. I hope that makes sense. But that's why people still like using analog gear. Fill out the box. Yeah, I see what you mean, say fill out the box. But yeah, the saturation just adds more and more sort of like warmth to things. That's what it does. So tips on layering basses. Well, I kind of sort of showed you like having a send does what it can do to a sub. It automatically gives you a bit of top end. Layering basses, I would always, most of the time, have a sub playing on its own. Oh, let me turn that distortion to send off. Aux. Get rid of that. And then say if we took this one, I would probably cut the lows out of this because the sub's playing the lows. Or did I do that on the sub? Sorry. Yeah. Make sure the sub's go back in. So I can use a sort of separate sub, so I've got control of how the sub is. But also I might just sort of make loads of random bass sounds and export them as audio, and then I can drag them in and chop them up. There's so many different ways of making and creating and layering basses, so I can't really go into too much detail because we'll be here for a long time. Let me just find that chat window again. Okay, cool. Well, I've kind of gone through all the questions. We've done like an hour and a half, so I think we can kind of end it there. I know, as I say again, it was a vague sort of outline of making music, and I hope it kind of makes sense, because I kind of went about it in a bit of a random way. But rather than sit and say, this is how I make my tunes, aren't I great? I wanted to give you an understanding of how you can sort of cut out a lot of the waffle that there is out there and just get to an end result. The creative side of things is down to the individual. I'm not going to sit there and say, you have to make basses like this, follow the steps, because that's down to you. You know, you want to explore and have fun. You know, you don't want to listen to me saying, look how great I am. Like, I made the worst tune I've ever made, but it's probably a good example of how you can get that tune to a standard where it's just been playing out from very basic steps, how to make some basic sounds. To me, they're basic. Maybe to you, you'd be like, they're not basic, but they are quite basic in the grand scheme of things. Basic sounds, some basic mix techniques, some basic mastering techniques, and then you can see it kind of stand up next to other people's music. Sonically, just about. Musically, no. It was one note and a couple of kicks and snares and one percussion loop. But yeah, that's bang on. Thanks. Fingers crossed to do an extended masterclass. Yeah, I'd like to do something a bit more in depth. But yeah, I hope. Thanks everyone who locked on. Like, I hope you learned something. Nice. The bus thing got me. So really like how you explained that sort of thing. Technics. Cheers, bro. Thank you. It was a great session. Yeah, wicked. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if you want to add anything, mate, if you're still there. But yeah, I'm pretty much done. I think these. Yeah, there we go. I'll let you take over, mate. But yeah, thanks for locking on.
Yeah, nice one. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, mate. I think everyone's kind of. I mean, I can see from the questions coming in, and everyone's just been kind of locked in. Yeah, so brilliant. Thank you very much, man. Yeah, so I guess this will be available on the community music socials if you want to watch back, if you kind of want to kind of watch anything that you might have missed, or just want to kind of get a bit of a clearer thing on what you watched. So it'll be available on the YouTube channel, the Twitter, and the Facebook. So that's CM Sounds at CM Sounds. I've just put a link in the chat, so that's a link just if you want a bit more information about. So, with the foundation degree, you would learn everything that's kind of been mentioned here, plus business side of music and everything like that. So if you want a bit more information on that, then click through to the website. I've just put that in the chat. But yeah, thank you very much, Herb. And guys, yeah, so this is a monthly thing. So next month, I believe we're going to have a producer called Ray Fox, and he's going to be going through more of the house side of things. With Ableton, he's going to be going through. So you'll get a mail out with all the information of that if you want to jump in on that. And that's with Ray Fox, and I believe that's on the 22nd. Yeah, so the 22nd of May, that should be around about the same time. All right, guys, but yeah, thanks for jumping in, and thanks again, Herb.
Cool, my pleasure, mate. Yeah, everyone have a good weekend. I'm going to go running.
That's one. Brilliant. All right, guys. Cool. Thank you very much.
Cool. Take care.
Thank you.
Easy.